thank you also to the Covenant Foundation, who not only constantly encourages us to find ways to bring women together meaningfully, to learn with and from each other, but we owe them actually an enormous extra debt of gratitude tonight, because tonight's gathering was actually designed in person, which is a rarity for us, at one of their gatherings with beautiful educators from within the Covenant Network, who I'm excited for you to meet in a second. It is such a gift always and inspirational to be in a space that celebrates and nourishes the very best in Jewish learning. So we are very, very grateful to Covenant and to the Aviv Foundation, who has been so supportive of all that we do from the very, very start. Tonight's HerTorah, just by way a little bit of a framing, is that it was inspired by our last gathering around Mother's Day. We spent a lot of time in our last gathering talking about the ways that Mother's Day can be hard for many people for many different reasons. And, you know, what it boiled down to at its core is that the relationships between parents and children are important. That sounds tremendously trite, but that relationship plays such a significant role in our lives. And often those roles don't necessarily get filled by biological relationships. Sometimes, oftentimes, they are chosen. And we find those deep and important connections that we need in places that may not be between mother and child, parent and child, whatever that relationship might be. So I am very, very thankful that we have Naomi Oxman here tonight, who was one of our therapists that held space so beautifully at our Mother's Day gathering. She's here tonight again to acknowledge that the conversations around these important relationships can bring up a lot for us, sometimes when it's hard, or when it's missing, or when it's been lost, or when it's confusing. And so thank you, Naomi, really, for being here. And since this is Shavuot HerTorah, which is a celebration of the gift of Torah, I'm going to say a giant thank you to Rabbanit Eliza Sperling and Rabbanit Dahlia Davis, who give us the gift of the most gorgeous Torah every single day, and who teach us and remind us, above all, that each one of us has a gift of Torah to give to each other. So thank you both tremendously, Rabbanit Eliza.
1 minute. Okay. All right. So tonight we are talking about those people in our lives who become mentors or role models for us, and also for the ways in which we become mentors and role models for others. And I started thinking about this not only at the Mother's Day event that we had, but after October 7th, I think all of us were kind of flailing a little bit and trying to think, I don't know what to do right now. I am at a loss and looking for some guidance. And it turned, and maybe people were also looking for guidance to us, but we were also so shocked and thrown by what happened that it was really hard to be a mentor. It was really hard to know what to say. And I think maybe even the people who we look to also didn't really know what to say. And as a mother of 2 kids who are in college, one of which has been in the news a lot, I also wrestled very much with what does it mean to be a mother mentor in terms of my role. I'm not on the college campus. I'm on WhatsApp groups where I hear a lot of very anxious things from a lot of very anxious parents. I don't know if that stuff is true or is not true. It's different from what I hear from my kids. How can I be there for my children at this point in time when I've never really dealt with anything like this before? I'm not there. And it's hard. It's a lot to think about. What is it? What is my role at this point? So when I was looking at the book at Megillat Ruth, the book of Ruth, I was thinking a lot about this relationship between Naomi and Ruth and what it means to be there for somebody else, especially when that other person is not you, right? They are going to have to make their own decisions and follow their own path. And that can be very complicated and very intense. So tonight we have the gift of hearing from some wonderful teachers who are going to teach us the book of Ruth. So we've got Shira Schiowitz, who's going to teach us about the first chapter of Megillat Ruth, the book of Ruth. We've got Susie Tanchel, who's going to teach us about the third chapter of the book of Ruth. And we also have some wonderful women who are going to talk to us about their own experiences with having a mentor, being a mentor, the complexities in that kind of relationship. So we've got Sarah Seigal-Katz, who's going to start us off. We've got Devorah Walder, who's going to talk about being the mom of a child in middle school who was confronting anti-Semitism. And we've got Elizabeth Mandel, who will tell us about the work that she does professionally as a mentor. And we are also very lucky, as Ariella said, that we've got a mental health professional in the mix. We've got Naomi Oxman, who has been so helpful to us in thinking about what is the role of a mentor, what are some of the complications in that relationship. And she's going to help us think about these questions. And also at the end, we're going to be able, for anybody who wishes to kind of stay on with Naomi and talk about it from her point of view. So I'm so happy that you're all here. Let's get started. We are going to start by hearing first from Sarah Seigal-Katz. And I am going to put on my glasses, 1 minute. Okay, Rabbanit Sarah Seigal-Katz is a teacher and lecturer in the fields of Jewish law and Jewish thought, provides guidance for brides and couples, and conducts workshops that integrate Beit Midrash study, Jewish study, and creative writing. She is the founder of Gluya, which addresses safety, life cycle ceremonies, sexuality, relationships, prayers, and contemporary poetry. You can see her whole bio in the chat. Sarah and I met up, I think, almost a year ago, and we realized that Sarah from Israel and Ariella and I here were basically doing the same kinds of things. That it was so wonderful to meet a soul sister. So thank you, Sarah, for being with us. And Sarah is going to talk to us about her relationship with her Naomi, her mother-in-law.
Thanks a lot, Aliza. So I'm very excited to participate in this special event tonight, and I will do my best to express myself in English. I'm located in Riverdale, but I'm definitely Israeli in any aspect, so forgive me about some mistakes that you probably hear. My mind's to Naomi loving words when she calls her daughters-in-law by their nicknames of kindship. ותאמר נעמי, שובנה בנותיי, למה תלכנה עמי, העוד לבנים במאי, והיו לכם לאנשים. בנותיי, she said. When Naomi said that, she's very personal with her brides, and I want to share a very personal prayer-related experience in my life. Prayer is always a very delicate issue to talk about. During my single years, about 20 years ago, I had a busy life as a teacher, student, and cultural activist. As well as fulfilling myself, I also poured my heart out to God, Shechina. One evening, a friend convinced me to go with them to a shiur given by Rabbanit. I had seen her around the neighborhood. I liked her as a person, but didn't quite connect with her messages from the Torah. That I knew were meaningful for my friends, but without judging her, just were not for me. Nevertheless, one evening, I went with them to her shiur. At the beginning, I listened politely and with mild curiosity, but very soon found myself objecting to things that she said. I didn't know what to do. The shiur was long, the room was crowded, and the atmosphere intense. At that moment, I decided to use my notebook to write down my thoughts and feelings. This wasn't something strange for me, but it usually happens in intimate space of my room and not when I appear to be taking notes, but am actually doing sometimes else. And so I wrote and wrote while listening and creating a kind of a interpersonal dialogue in my notebook. The shiur came to end, and yes, I went to the shul with my friend the week after that too. This continued for some time. One such evening, the Rabbanit turned to the audience and she said, start praying for your mother-in-law. And she stressed her point further. You're praying for your chatan? You're wondering where your ben zug? Start praying for the person who knows exactly where he is and was his mother. She's part of his soul, isn't it? Don't just pray for the bridegroom who hasn't yet arrived. Pray also for his mother, for your mother-in-law, for the future, for what will be your life, not just with him. Get it and be spiritually responsible about it, even from now. Start praying already now for your relationship with her. Wow. When you have those special moments when prayer just burst forth from within you, don't just direct your prayers for finding the soulmate you want and the connection you desire with him. A significant part of that is the connection with her. Your connection with her will be independent, not one that every fiber of your being is connected to. So start praying for it already now. Wow, that really grabbed me. It's that simple, and that's it. From that day on, I prayed for my mother-in-law. I prayed for her as part of my other prayers, and sometimes to her and for us. I prayed not necessarily with regard to our future relationship, but for her well-being. There were days when I didn't know if my partner had even been born, but I prayed for his mother all the time. Somehow I knew she was already born, and that we would also have a journey together. Prayers for her never stopped. As well as I learned to send my love to my partner before I met, I learned to send my love to my mother-in-law even before I met her. During the single Shabbat candle and lift my eyes to the sky to say, here I am, still just one, not yet lighting two candles. Pray the soulmate I was looking for battle leads, and yet for our future relationship. There were times where other time when it was less frequent, but it was part of my appeal to the unknown forces. I won't elaborate on how we met and how, despite the fact that we both soon knew that this was the real thing, and how she prompted him to propose to me because he was concerned that because of my feminism, I would beat him to it. There is something so delicate and private about prayers. I don't want to expand on it too much, but I'm sure you understand how I tremble at the deep bond I have with my mother-in-law, and it's the knowledge that not only do we look like mother and daughter, who said you always need Freud or Jung, but that it's so much more than that. Several months after the wedding, during yet another one of our funny conversation that combined Hebrew, English, and phrases in Yiddish, I told her that because the word shver, the Yiddish word for father-in-law, is coming from the word in Yiddish and German as well, schwer, it's hard, and the female version is schwiger. So I don't want to think a lot about the meaning of difficult relationship. And because I don't feel that my relationship with her and my father-in-law is difficult, I want to change the whole notion for the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship. And ever since, I call her Sweetie Shvigi. The Mishnah in Masechet Yevamot says, הכל נאמנין לעדה, חוץ מחמותה, ובת חמותה, וצרתה, ויבמתה, ובת בעלה. Their description for the mother-in-law that is called chamot, a word that sounds like it comes from warm, ham, good feelings. But according to Yevamot, the relationship between the mother-in-law with the son-wife includes tension and negative passion that can lead to biased testimony. The potential sweetness in this relationship is not necessarily bashert. It's also a choice. It's an open heart and long and profound relationship, if only given the opportunity. Yes, for me personally, my relationship with my mother-in-law is also expressed in the fact that she often said she's like a mother to me, and I'm like a daughter to her, bnotai, bnoti, biti. This was probably also the point at which I identify with the statement of the Rabbanit that said on the Torah shiur, my shvigi calls me my daughter. In a way, it can seem like following a rule of being nice. When she calls me shvigi, as far as our relationship is concerned, I know we are on the same page. In other words, I pray that we are on the same page. The Maimonides writes in the Mishneh Torah in Sefer Nashim about divorce laws as follows. There are the women who hate each other, mother-in-law, and then you continue other relationships inside the family that are problematic. In my point of view, as a feminist, the myth of mother-in-law and of the bride relationship lacks the potential of sisterhood. Whoever suggests that the relationship between two women, one as mother-in-law and the other as a daughter-in-law, is necessarily difficult. What will we do about this pattern? Will we accept it as it, or we will rebel against it and maintain it differently? I share my story because now, when the experience is mainly of tears welling up without knowing where our prayers go, God forbid that I should say that prayers are always accepted. God forbid it will be understood as if I'm saying that every prayer is answered or something like that. I don't know the secrets of life. I study life, and I know that whether it's called prayer, this is a single story of a spiritual and embodied emotional effort. Embodiment is something else. Amidst the many hopes in our hearts, whether we have words for it or not. It is in honor of Naomi and Ruth that I came to tell my story because we're close.
Sarah, thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you. Something happened. I stopped with the last pasuk. Ba'asher telchi elech, the relationship.
Great. Thank you so much for that beautiful story. I heard it one time and then I had to hear it again, and now I'm hearing it a third time, and each time I'm so moved by it. And that's such wisdom to think about that. And I'm also looking at the comments, and Dvorah wishing a complete recovery to your mother-in-law, and wishing us all, in whatever relationships we have with people around us and our extended families, to have the luck and the good fortune and the answered prayers as you did, Sarah. Thank you. Okay, so now I am really honored to introduce Shira Schiowitz, who is going to teach us the first chapter of the book of Ruth. Shira teaches Tanakh, Bible, and Jewish identity at SAR High School, where she serves as co-director of professional development and mentors new teachers. You can see the rest of her bio in the chat. Shira, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thanks so much, Eliza, for inviting me to join in this really beautiful gathering. And Sarah, also thank you for your words. It's actually a perfect opening for going into chapter 1 of the book of Ruth. Because what I'll say is that the book of Ruth, hang on, I'm just putting I want to see people and not myself. Okay, here we go. Um, what I'll say is that the book of Ruth has this beautiful overarching relationship between Ruth and Naomi and their friends and their mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, almost mother and daughter in a way. And yet they also are a complicated relationship. And one of the things that I love most about learning Torah is that the Torah doesn't hide from complicated relationships. On the contrary, kind of puts it all at us so that we can analyze it and we can think about it and we can think about our own lives, which are also complicated. It's real. So I kind of want to use that lens and raise a bunch of questions about this relationship that between Ruth and Naomi that is role model, mentor, mom, mother-in-law, kind of all wrapped up in one, and talk about what were some of the complicating factors in this. And hopefully this will be something we'll continue to explore as we go through. So what I'm going to do is I am going to share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about chapter 1. There we go. 1 second, just getting onto the right slide. There we go. Okay. Okay. So here we go. We are at, just get back one. Okay, great. This is the right slide. Okay, so chapter 1 in Ruth starts with the backstory, which is really told in just a few verses. But the backstory is that Naomi and her husband Elimelech moved. Moved to Moab. They leave Israel. They move to a foreign country, and in that place, their 2 children, their 2 sons, marry these Moabite women. One is Orpah and one is Ruth. Now, in very quick succession, the text tells us that Naomi's husband dies and both of her boys die. And she's really left with nothing. She seems, we learn later, that she left a wealthy woman. She has nothing left, but she comes back, but she realizes that she wants to return back to Israel, whether by necessity, whether because she wants to be back with her people, whatever. She decides that she wants to go back to Israel. And we enter the scene, like the first real relationship scene is when Naomi is speaking. Naomi is leaving, and we almost can imagine like her 2 daughter-in-laws, these Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, are following Naomi. And they're all kind of leaving Moab together on their way to Israel. Okay, as they're leaving, so if you take a look, this is really where our scene picks up, and it's not the genesis of their relationship, but it's the genesis of this kind of Ruth and Naomi mentoring relationship. So can I get someone to read these? There's about, let's see, there's 5 verses here. I cut and pasted a little bit from chapter 1, but can I get a reader to read this initial scene between Ruth and Naomi?
What line do you want me to read?
Please read the English, please, starting from where it says 9. That's verse 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she kissed them farewell. They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? I have any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you. Oh no, my daughters. My lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of Adonai has struck out against me." They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your Hashem my Hashem. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may Adonai do to me, if anything but death parts from you,
Beautiful.
parts me from you."
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much for that reading.
You're welcome.
So let's think about this. So I want to focus. I mean, Ruth makes this unbelievable, monumental, impressive speech. Till your God is my God, till death do part. I'll be buried with you. But I want to shift the lens a little bit to Naomi and notice that Naomi pushes away. Ruth wants to come with her, and she keeps telling go back. Your sister-in-law went back. Go back to Moab. Why is she so strong in discouraging Ruth not to come with her and not to kind of like jump in and share her lot? So I'm actually going to ask you if we could maybe put this into the chat. Let me see, I'm opening. Here we go. I'm opening my chat. So if you could put in the chat, what do you think is going on here? Why is Naomi so strongly pushing away Ruth? And I'll also just say that the beauty of the text is that it doesn't tell us straight out. So if you have any thoughts, please enter in the chat. You can also, while people are writing in, also feel free for a moment or two to jump in and, share your thoughts. And I'm also reading the chat at the same time. Is there anyone who wants to share their thought while we're reading the chat? If so, you can jump in because I can't see everybody. So, maybe why is she pushing her away? So maybe, right, Devorah, your first comment, she wants to know if she's really in, and this is the rabbinic source also, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later, that Naomi is trying to push away Ruth because, this is a big deal, what you're joining. And if you want to come with me and go back to Israel with me, it's not going to be easy. So are you really in? Okay. Another possibility, maybe I don't have anything left for you. I want you to remarry. I want you to build your life again. And is there anything that I can really give you at this point? Better for you to stay in Moab. Also, do you really, right? Again, do you really want in? This is going to be hard for you. You're going to be the other in so many ways. And by the Marilyn, I see you wrote, she's also grieving herself. And taking on somebody else is also going to be a big deal. Okay, so we have lots of different, and these are beautiful. Keep reading them. Yeah, by the way, Emily wrote, sometimes we don't feel worthy of the care that people try to give us and we push them away. Maybe Naomi is having her own self-doubt and continuing, doesn't want her to share in the suffering. Okay, so there's so many different possibilities of why Naomi pushes away Ruth, and we really don't know exactly from the text. I just want to point out to you before I kind of shift into just a few questions, is that it doesn't, once Ruth makes her statement, Naomi accepts her, but she's not happy about it. And if you look at the next few verses, actually, can I get a reader for this? This is towards the end of chapter 1, and actually follows what we just read. This is Naomi's reaction once after Ruth's statement. So can someone jump in and read these verses, 18, 19, 20, 21?
Sure. When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to speak with her, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" "Do not call me Naomi," she said. "Call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me? When Shaddai..."
Oh, I'm sorry. That was me.
That's okay.
Go ahead. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Okay, cool. When Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me.
Okay, great. So I just want to point out here just quickly that it's not like once Ruth makes her strong declaration, Naomi's like, okay, great. Now I'm all in. Like, we got this. We're doing this. It talks about that they continue their journey. It was probably not a short journey. And just moving this around. I have too many things open over here. But right, Naomi says to her, that's it. Like, she doesn't speak to her. She kind of gives her the silent treatment. And they walked silently back to Bethlehem. And also, once they reached Bethlehem and the women say, "Is this Naomi?" Right? And she says, "No, I'm not. I'm embittered. I can't be called sweetness anymore." And she says, "I left my lot was full and I came back, here I am, and I'm empty. Now, there is a woman standing next to her who's just dedicated her life to her. So it doesn't end even after Ruth pushes back. And I think this leaves this tension, this open question, of what is Naomi thinking throughout this process, and what are her motivations in the way that she pushes away Ruth? Now, by the way, I'll see, yeah, Ellen, I had such a similar reaction when you read it. It's like, hi, yeah, I'm here. I'm with her. I'm not empty. But I'll a few people asked about the conversion. This is the rabbinic source for conversion and the way that we encourage people. Judaism's theory that, make sure that people really know what they're getting into and make sure that they're sincere about it. So I'm not going to read this inside, but if you could take a look at the slide in Ruth Rabbah in the Midrash, it discusses, right, why does Naomi push Ruth away so strongly? Well, it's because that's how we do it when somebody wants to convert. We want to make sure that they really want to come in, that they really that they want to be there. This is a big deal, right? And this is not, this is heavy. And are you really in? So Naomi pushing away 3 times is actually where we have some of the laws of conversion, right? That we push away somebody who wants to convert. But once we see they're sincere, we take them in. I'm just going to notice that once Naomi sees that Ruth is sincere, she still doesn't take her in. It's not after that 3rd time that there's this open arms, like, you're with me.
Shira?
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to add, because I just noticed it when it said she stopped to talk to her, the Hebrew words were Vatefdal, it's not on there now, Ledaber Eleha. And I think that was like a turning point, that she stopped talking Eleha at her, as it didn't say Ita, that she stopped. So I think that was a pivotal moment where it's like there was a change in the relationship in terms of she's not talking at her daughter-in-law and doesn't say Ita. So the pause might be, now the relationship is transitioning.
Oh, that's such a beautiful read. I love that. And that's really where we're going to think about this in the text. And I'll just show you, here's one other possibility. And I think you raised this also in the chat discussion, right? Why does Naomi push Ruth away? Maybe it has nothing to do with trying to make sure that, she really understands what she's getting into. Maybe Naomi was embarrassed to have this Moabite woman with her after she'd left Israel for 10 years, coming back. Now she has this Moabite daughter-in-law. So it could be that there is some kind of self-interest involved, and having Ruth with her is a liability. So I want to actually raise questions. I'm not going to resolve anything here, and I think this can be part of our evolving conversation. But these were some questions I had for myself, thinking about being someone who has been mentored, thankfully, and also somebody who tries to help people when that relationship happens. But here's a few questions I'm thinking about. So first of all, do I have a responsibility to mentor somebody or to kind of take somebody in, be a role model for somebody if I don't want to? Naomi clearly seems to be saying, I've had a lot going on. I don't want this role right now. So is there actually like a responsibility to do that? Okay. Question number 2 is, can I be a good mentor if I'm also have my own self-interest at heart? And the truth is, we all always have all of we can't ever really separate our self-interest. So even I see that in the comments, right? Let me just say, right, Heather, you're saying Ruth also has self-interest. It might not only be to help Naomi. So what does a relationship look like, a kind of role model, mentee relationship, when both parties want to help each other, but also have other interests in mind? And my third and last question is, can family members be good mentors? And I say this also as a mom and a daughter, and having many times, first of all, I think that as much as we love, our family members, there's also self-interest involved there. I want you to basically do whatever I tell you should do, and you should be the me that never, the better me, and make all the choices that I never made. So there certainly is some there's love and selflessness, but there's also self-interest. And there's sort of this inherent complication in family member relationships with this like role modeling and parents and children. So I just want to raise that question also, that on the one hand, it's the most beautiful mentoring relationship, but on the other hand, it's kind of fraught, and it always ends up like that. So these are the questions I'm going to raise that hopefully we can develop a little bit in conversation. Oh,
Thank
let
you.
me stop my screen share.
Amazing. Wow, thank you, Shira, for raising all these really important questions. I guess I want to invite Susie, who's going to teach us next, and Naomi to start us off with, and Shira, to start us off in a little conversation about some of these questions. And please put your thoughts in the chat and we will integrate them. This is all one big experiment to see if we can do things on the fly. So, so please be patient with us. Susie, do you want to take one of those questions that Shira threw out?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm actually going to develop one of them maybe in when we talk a little bit about chapter 3. So I don't know if we want to jump ahead a little bit, but I think the question about self-interest is really a provocative one, because it requires so much, Shira, right, of self-knowledge. And sometimes, well, there's a mental health worker on this, but sometimes I would say when self-knowledge is, when our emotions get involved, sometimes self-knowledge gets a little more complicated. And that if we have a blind spot, or if we're triggered in some situation, I just think it's that much harder to be aware of kind of where you are and what you're at. Yes, as Beth said in the chat, in both directions, right? And you have to imagine that this moment in Naomi and Ruth's lives were incredibly complicated and incredibly challenging. And yeah, Ruth is a wounded healer. Exactly. Like, they're both wounded. And how do you manage your own feelings as you're trying to be there for somebody else?
Yeah, it's such a hard question. We do have another character in the book of Ruth. We have Boaz, who actually seems to be able to maintain that distance a little bit more because he doesn't have a history with Ruth. And when he sees Ruth, he can say, "Oh, I see you as being this great woman. Let me tell you how I see you," and gives her a path forward. Whereas it seems like Naomi just has so much baggage with Ruth that it's almost like it's not possible for her to see any way forward for Ruth.
But I think that the question of self-interest and self-reflection, those are really important points. But I think we also have to be really mindful that Naomi was in the throes of like enormous grief. And when a person is in a place of grief, it's just very difficult. It's almost impossible to respond in the kind of what you would expect a normal, loving way, because it's just naturally that they're self-absorbed, and she is so self-absorbed. It's hard to take anything else in, even from her, daughter. I mean, it's just very difficult. So I think it's really important to remember where she's coming from in that moment of time. Not to even mention the grief of what it's like going back to Bethlehem, going back to Israel after having left it. So I'm sure that I'm not sure. I would imagine that she was in place of tremendous self-absorption at the time.
Right. And also, right, Ruth is really sharing her commitment to Naomi and to her people, to Naomi's people. But Naomi doesn't know how she's going to be perceived by her nation when she comes back, right? Because Ruth was an outsider. And so in the midst of this trauma, right? And Deb wrote in the chat that like seeing Ruth might remind her of her 2 lost sons, right? In the midst of that trauma is now having to take on someone else too. I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been.
You know what I'm thinking
And-
as you were all saying that? Sorry, go ahead, Naomi.
No, what I was going to add also when you were talking earlier is, Shira, was that and you know, we can make this, you know, kind of modernize it too, because it's like Ruth by Ruth wanting to go with her, she's saying, yes, I had a relationship with your son and I lost my husband, your son, but I also have a relationship with you.
Mhm.
And I think that we sometimes lose sight of that. And I think that's a beautiful thing to think about when we think about daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law or mentors, that she has her own relationship with her, you know, mother-in-law, with Naomi. Can Naomi actually receive that from her? Can she actually see, like, yeah, I'm related to by virtue of my son, but I'm also related to because of who you are. And that reminds me of what we were talking about earlier when Sarah spoke so beautifully about her relationship with her mother-in-law. So I just want to point that out.
Shira, you have the last word.
I'm just noticing Florence's comment in the chat. Okay, hang on, I'm just trying to find it again. Okay, just that Ruth was so connected to Naomi because they shared the same man, and that could also be an intimacy that keeps him alive. I thought that was such an interesting point. And in a way, the relationships that are the closest are also the relationships that are the most fraught. So on the one hand, there's so much potential, right, for real care and love and connection. And there's also so many ways that we can almost get too mixed up in each other and put too much of
Totally.
ourselves into
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, totally.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so to be continued, but this is such an amazing segue because we are going to have 2 more first-person narratives. One is with Dvora Walder, who is going to talk about her experience as a parent and what it means to parent and to be a mentor as a parent. And then later we're going to have Elizabeth Mandel talk about how sometimes it's better to have somebody who's not the parent actually serve as the mentor. So Dvora, I'm going to read your bio first, and then I'm going to invite you to kind of address some of these questions. Dr. Dvora Walder is an acupuncturist in Silver Spring, Maryland. Okay, I just want to say you should go to her if you were anywhere near her. She cured my migraines, just saying. She is the owner of Spectrum Acupuncture and Wellness, focusing on women's health, fertility, and chronic pain. She is a longtime meditator and meditation teacher with a special focus on weaving Jewish spirituality into her work. So, Dvora, I know that you have children in various stages of life. And one of them is in a public school in Maryland where there was an anti-Semitic incident. And you had to think really carefully about what your role was, what to tell him. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the issues that came up for you?
Sure, absolutely. I don't think that we're unique in how things have changed this year since October 7th. And at the same time, middle schoolers thematically haven't changed. And, you know, it's, as many of you probably experienced with your own families, whether your own children or people in your community, was hard to know what to say and not say after everything happened. And of course, we did a lot of reassurance of our individual family members and keeping in touch and all of that. But my son came home from school and, you know, we were checking in, has anything changed at school? Well, this one kid said something, which I am not going to repeat, but it was like horrible, said a horrible thing. And I said, was it directed at you? And he said, well, sort of, yes, because he knows I'm Jewish, but also sort of no. It was kind of like a statement. And, you know, kind of teasing out how much of, like, when kids learn swear words, for example, then they're like often very excited, like, where can I use my new swear word? And like, where can I get a rise out of someone, especially a middle school age kid? And so it was this combination of like, does this child have any idea what they said? Did they mean what they said? Did they actually say it to my kid, or did they say it in the direction of my kid? Would the same kid have said some other terrible thing because he's kind of a bully? And it was interesting as parents. I'm fortunate to have a co-parent, and my husband was very upset in a way that I, somewhat surprisingly, was less upset. And, you know, we talked about that a lot. We happen to have a good guidance counselor at the school who's also Jewish. And, you know, we didn't want to downplay it with our son to recognize how wrong this was of a thing to say. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that he both didn't take it personally and that he recognized the source from which it came, which is like an immature middle school kid who is prone to say as ever many inflammatory things to get attention as this child can possibly glom onto. And this was like, you know, topic du jour that he found an opportunity to speak about. So I feel like that navigation, it's complex, you know, not getting stirred up ourselves when we hear these kinds of stories, holding space for the kid in this case, being empathetic to the other kid. So the school, in my opinion, handled it nicely. And they did call the kid in, and, you know, he was in trouble, whatever that means. And they called the parent in. Now the parent, it's like, you know, a regular, nice mom, not a Jewish family. And she was horrified. And she told the school, like, he did not learn that in my house. We do not speak that way. Those are not the beliefs, you know, shared in our household. I don't know where he got it. Well, we all know where he got it. Got it probably on the internet or the playground, right? And I think the school, you know, is kind of in this complicated position where they talk to the kid directly. They're trying not to put too much focus on who tattled, because that's a whole thing. And then how do you maintain a feeling of safety for children? Like, you have to speak up when something's wrong, but then you don't want to bring more attention on yourself, especially at that phase of development. So I don't exactly have a conclusion here because it's all ongoing. But I do feel like this, you know, in the context of our conversation tonight, both in terms of mentorship and how to both, you know, help support someone else through their experience, even in this case, a young person, while having our own feelings as parents. And I'm not saying my husband's response was better or worse than mine in any way. It just was from a slightly different perspective. You know, and then I think tying it, if there is a tie-in with the Ruth Naomi relationship, maybe the tie-in is like, we are coming from different perspectives and we might have something in common, but how are we really going to blend? How are we really going to cross the line from other to family? And I guess my hope is, and I don't actually know the kid who said the terrible thing, and it was unbelievable what he said. I don't know if there would be a way to include him in some educational conversation. I mean, I'm assuming that he's maturing because by nature, that he could actually recognize more about that. Like, I don't know if there could be an educational opportunity with this person, and this talk tonight is making me think I want to bring that back around to the guidance counselor before the school year ends. But it would be nice to think that maybe there could be a depth of empathy that the other kid could possibly expand into if they understood.
That's so interesting, Devora, because we started talking about what your role as a parent is for your own child, who you love, who suffered to some extent from what happened, and now you're talking about your relationship as a mentor for this other child who said the wrong thing, right? And what an amazing expansion of what it means to be a mentor for somebody.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us.
Absolutely. I will respond to Ariella to your question. Absolutely. I mean, he's seen other things in the meantime, and he definitely understands the source better, like that was a bit pointed from this person, but also, look, it's hard for any of us that are parents to see your kids have to develop that layer. At the same time, it's critical to exist in the world. And I thankfully happen to have a very empathetic kid. He's like really good at expressing emotions and talking about things, but I've seen him get stronger emotionally. And I've seen him also, like, he's wanted to become physically stronger, and he's been working on that. And those are helping each other. So yeah, work in process.
As we all are. Thank you. Thank you so much, Devorah. Okay, to continue this conversation, I'm so honored that we have Dr. Susie Tanchel with us. Susie is the Vice President of Hebrew College in Newton, Massachusetts, and she has a very long and impressive bio that is in the chat, but for the sake of time, I am going to let you read it in the chat and turn it over to Susie.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. And I think we should just jump right in, because aren't you dying to know at this point what happens with Ruth and Naomi? Because we left them just at the moment where they were going back, and we didn't know what was going to happen. And we actually have skipped a chapter, and we're going to meet them now in chapter 3, which is the third of 4 chapters of the story of Ruth. And they're just trying to figure out how the heck they are going to survive. Because as someone said earlier in the chat, I'm sorry that I've moved down in the chat, so I can't remember who said it, but someone noted that at that time of life, women, and still in many places of the world, women were very dependent on men to make sure that they could earn a living and have sustenance. And so here are 2 women trying to figure out how on earth that they are going to do that. So let's start. Elisa, if you wouldn't mind sharing the slides, we're going to start with reading a little bit of text, and then we're going to chat a bit together. And I hope you will participate just as much as you did when Shira was teaching, because it really is about a back and forth. So so Naomi, her mother-in-law, right, which we already know. So it's so interesting, right? Like, why? This is the first question. Like, why would the text emphasize again? This is her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, and she uses the word daughter. Daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. So just, oh, here we go. Just thinking about that verse for a moment. If you can go to the first slide, Elisa. Just thinking about, there we go. Why do you think Naomi might be using the name daughter right here, the word daughter, in this moment? So I'm going to invite people just to put their thoughts into the chat. And while we're thinking about that question, if somebody would read in English the next 5 lines.
Okay, I can do it if you want.
Great.
Now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you are to do. She replied, I will do everything you tell me. So she
Oh, wait. Yep.
So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her.
Great. So thank you so much. So here, I want to just say that really with gratitude to Eliza for starting this conversation with thinking about a role model, the mentor-mentee relationship, because there is so much that I have now gleaned. See how you glean barley and now you glean meaning? See that right there? Glean, there's so much that you can, that I'm gleaning from this text, that I'm interpreting and understanding from this text that I just never saw before because of this particular lens, which is one of the amazing things about what I think about sacred Jewish texts, is that depending on what lens you bring to it, helps you see new and different meanings that are so relevant always to our lives. So one of the questions I had is like, when you're looking at this, how would you characterize Badum Ching? Yeah. How would you characterize what Naomi is doing with Ruth? Would you say it's advice? Would you say it's a suggestion? Would you say it's instruction? Would you say it's something else? How are you understanding Naomi's comments to Ruth in this moment? So if anybody would like to unmute themselves and say what they're thinking, how would you describe Naomi's, almost like a command? Naomi's telling Ruth what they came to leverage over the months or years.
Sounds like trafficking to me.
Ah, right, that maybe she's kind of putting Ruth into a very dangerous sexual situation. Instructions for the benefit of them both. Right. This is a very potentially charged, complex moment.
Seems
In a
less
way,
Pretending to
coercive,
find a husband.
manipulative.
Manipulative. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So pimping her out. Right. So
she's also taking advantage a little bit of, because she's in a weaker position. Ruth is in a weaker position at this point, even weaker than Naomi, because she doesn't know the circumstances or the country or the culture.
So Amy, that's so interesting, right? A weaker position, because I was also thinking about that, of the power dynamics in this relationship, right? As there are in mentor-mentee relationships throughout our lives.
Right.
And what I was so struck by when I started thinking about it from this vantage point is like, we can have a compassionate reading of Naomi, or we can have a more judgmental reading of Naomi, right? The text allows for both interpretations. Right, the text allows for possibility. So depending on, it could even be within us, we can hold those multiple interpretations.
But
yeah.
No, I was just thinking that, but isn't Ruth putting herself in that position also in the beginning when she says, and I don't have the text in front of me, like she's saying, I'm giving myself over to you, your people are my people, I'll go wherever you go. So she kind of set herself up for that in a way, maybe.
Right. So that's one of the things, right, is that when Ruth says that, and then says in this chapter, she says, okay, Naomi, I'm going to go do exactly what you just said. And when I read that, I started thinking about mentor and mentee relationships in my life. And that how often is it that we want to just say, okay, I'm going to do whatever my mentor says? Or are there moments, and this is a real question, are there moments where we sort of want to say, I'm going to do part of what you're saying, or I'm going to take sort of the broader point, but not do exactly, we're going to get to that outcome, but not do it exactly the way you're describing? Or are we going to say, like, you know what, even though I'm the quote unquote weaker one in this relationship, I'm going to trust my own gut. Right? I'm going to stay, authentic to myself. And I'm gonna have a little bit of space between what the mentor is saying and what I'm doing. If that resonates with you, can you just raise your hand or wave? Is there a time in your life where you've said, like, I need a little space from what my mentor's saying. I'm going to differentiate myself a little bit, right? Somebody named Ruth on this in the Zoom room says yes with an exclamation point. Yes, right? So again, with the same compassion or the same judgment that we have for Naomi, we can extend it to Ruth in this moment. Right? How can we say that, Ruth just agreed when we would differentiate ourselves? Or we can say, well, Ruth is in a circumstance that we've never been in. So how do we know?
I'm confused by the fact that in the end, the child that is born becomes Naomi's child.
Oh, and you're skipping ahead in that to chapter 4.
I'm sorry, but it's always confused me because Naomi calls her my daughter, and yet the child becomes Naomi's. So I always wonder, is Ruth just a conduit? I mean, is she a person? I'm not sure how to read that.
Yeah, you're going to have to come back for next week's session on chapter 4, and that's because we're just still on chapter 3 right now. But that is right. That is a in chapter 4, when the child is referred to as Naomi's child, there is a lot of discussion about exactly that point, right? Where is Ruth? Does Ruth count? Is Ruth just subservient to Naomi and just fulfilling kind of Naomi's dream of having offspring and being able to be safe? It's a very complicated question, to be sure. So I'm following Shira's lead now and just raising more questions rather than giving answers in that. So the confusion lives on.
I think also that it raises the whole issue, I mean, in terms of relationships, mentee, mentor, or just in relationships in general, in terms of like religion as well, if you want to expand to that, but just the whole idea about trust and where's the line between trust and then blind faith, where you have a voice and you lose your voice. I think you were kind of alluding to that before, because it's so important to be able to have that trust, but at the same time, you just, follow blindly without challenging, without having listening to your own gut.
Yeah, right. I love that. When people think about, there's a story earlier in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, about Abraham and maybe being asked by God to potentially sacrifice his son, and there's a whole question about, like, is that blind faith? Is that trust? Where is that line, right? And sometimes in life, person to person, those lines are tricky. And sometimes, unfortunately, people abuse trust, and it's, makes for a much more complicated situation, which is in part why I was thinking about the importance. I have never looked at it this way, truthfully, until we were preparing for tonight, but the importance really of trusting your guts and thinking about, well, Ruth was trying to save Naomi, but Naomi was asking a pretty outrageous thing. So was that the right thing to do? So perhaps I'll pause there. I could go on, but I'm thinking maybe I'll pause there. Yes, no?
Great, and we can have a discussion. Okay,
Great.
so I'm just going to call everybody back. Shira, Naomi, Devorah, jump on, Sarah, everybody who's spoken so far. Elizabeth, why don't you join us too? And anybody in the chat, to kind of talk about some of these questions, where it's so beautiful in chapter 1, where it seems like Ruth is going to go wherever Naomi tells her to. And now in chapter 3, we've got this really difficult question of how far do you follow somebody, especially when there is a power dynamic, a power differential between you, as Susie was talking about. And that brings up really, really difficult questions. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on some of these questions that Susie brought up.
Well, I think oftentimes or sometimes when you are in a particular role in the relationship builds, you can lose sight and lose yourself because of the complicated nature of the relationship as it develops over time. And so things may start off more, I guess, innocently, but I think there is opportunity for advantage to be taken in power and control to start to play into a relationship. And sometimes I want to say, like, maybe even unknowingly. And so I think, along the road of relationships, whatever those relationships are, there needs to be like ongoing, like internal check-ins with oneself as far as, what's happening in this relationship with whoever it might be on both sides. And we sometimes lose sight of those, they kind of get swallowed into the relationship and we don't question it. And I think it's important along the way to question.
I just recently learned, I know this is a little nuts, but I just recently learned that there are these things called romance novels. Who knew that like Hallmark TV movies are actually in books called romance novels? I have a 15-year-old daughter, and one of the things that I was reading the same book that she was reading just because I was interested in seeing sort of, okay, what is my 15-year-old up to? And one of the things I saw in one of the books is that there's now this whole part where the ones that she's reading are heterosexual couples where, the boy says to the girl repeatedly, "Is this okay?" when he holds her hand. "Is this okay?" when he kisses her. When I was growing up, there wasn't those kinds of conversations. So it's just pretty wild to see how that gets translated from, kind of what's in the culture now affecting this new genre called romance novels.
Susie, I wanted to just interject. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at this story as kind of an allegory that it's a matter of trust. It's love and it's trust. And like when Hashem spoke to the Jewish people, when they was taking them out of Egypt, what does he say? Oh, take a lamb, tie it to your doorpost for 3 days, then slaughter it, put blood all over the doorpost. And I mean, that's kind of outrageous. The lamb was, I mean, that could be a dangerous thing. The lamb was one of the gods of Egypt, and, they were slaves, they were everything. But the people just went and did it. It was pretty much an outrageous thing. But because we trusted God, we loved God, we listened to him at that point, we went and did something that was seemingly outrageous, and it changed the course of history. So here, Ruth was telling Naomi, no, you can't get rid of me. Your God is my God. Where you lie, I will lie. Your people will be my people. I'm totally into this. And then Naomi gives her seemingly outrageous instructions, and she goes and does it, not because she's being coerced, not because she's but it's the total immersion of trust in what Naomi is telling her, that maybe this is what God wants her to do. This is the way it is to be accomplished. And she goes and does that. And I think that it's a lesson for us, people who are constantly, well, maybe there really isn't a God. Maybe God doesn't really speak to us. And how could it be such outrageous things and we don't know? And here's the fact. And oftentimes as Jews, we take so much for granted that sometimes you have to look from an outsider's perspective, from somebody who's non-Jewish, who looks and says, look what you Jewish people have. Look at all of the wonderful things. And Ruth has not only looked, but she drank the Kool-Aid. She sure looked did. And she jumped in, and because I think one of the biggest questions that people always ask about McGillis Ruth is, yes, we know it's about her conversion, but at what point in the story did she actually convert? Because if she wasn't converted while they were still in Moab, then how could Naomi actually be her mother-in-law? Because it wasn't a legal marriage, because it was a non-Jew and a Jew.
Amy,
So
I think it's such an interesting question and a beautiful perspective on how to look at the book as one of modeling trust, right? And right, competing values. Like that's such a beautiful value of being loyal and trusting and throwing yourself into something, right? And but also, right, having this sense of, well, what do you do when you grow a little bit more in the relationship? It's not the same way that it was in the beginning. And where you might want to progress into like a more, I don't know, like a more grown up, like you don't just want to be the child in the relationship, right? Like you want to be somebody who's grown a little bit. Susie, do you want to?
Well, I just wanted to thank Amy for that reading, because I thought for the first time, maybe Naomi knew Boaz a little bit, and with trust and love knew how it was going to go, which I never thought before. So thank you for that, Amy.
Do you mind if I speak first? I've often read this since my conversion over 35 years ago. I've always had a different I'm really enjoying these perspectives because I've always read this from, it's not just, it's about conversion, right? It's about, you talk about putting yourself, out there and showing that you're willing to do the work and putting, all of those kinds of messages. But I always think of in terms of anxiety, right? It's from two people's perspectives of vulnerability and anxiety. So Ruth, Naomi's in a very precarious position, and I have a lot of sympathy for her, even though someone said she's pimping her out or something. To me, Naomi, is struggling with her own sort of precarious position. Going back to Israel, did she fail in her sons marrying non-Jews? I mean, that's just a big weighted sort of thing for her to carry. But then Ruth, this whole reading is really about the maturation. You touched a little bit on this, Aliza, about how a convert goes from one position with a mentor to a completely different one, right? Where it's not about just growing up, but how much does a convert, internally calling themselves a convert, but maybe publicly doesn't necessarily look or walk with, in a convert lens anymore, and where do they land as they mature and as they get older? How I am at 55 is very different at 20. So it's just so interesting to see all these different perspectives, because mine has always been from the position of a convert, and what the convert goes through, that relationship completely changes. And the rabbis, from a rabbinical teaching, right, the rabbis are very clear from the very beginning. It is a very difficult walk, and the anxieties and the precariousness that you are walking through will be there in a constantly cycles throughout your life in different ways.
I love this conversation, and I am so happy that Naomi is going to facilitate for whoever wants to join at the end a continuation of this conversation, because it brings up for all of us from all the different perspectives that we come from, right? And I would say even multiple, like many of us have empathize with Naomi and empathize with Ruth and empathize with Boaz, and we've got all of those things together. So if everybody could hold on, write down what you were about to say so that we can continue this later. I want to introduce Elizabeth Mendel, who has some of her own expertise that she can share with us. Elizabeth's bio is going to be in the chat. I'll just say the first line, which is that she is J Girls Plus Magazine's executive director. She's an accomplished documentary filmmaker, published writer, editor, and community activist. So she thinks a lot about teenage girls, and she will help us think a little bit about what it means to mentor them in a way in which you're not the parent necessarily, but you're somebody else.
Thank you so much. And this has been such a generative conversation for me, because so much of what has been touched on speaks so closely to the work that I do. And so I've been taking little notes, as we've been going along. And I really appreciated that early on, Shira talked about the difference between a mother-daughter relationship, and that and I want to say that my mother is on this call, and she has absolutely been a role model to me my whole life. And I also am a mother of daughters. And there's always going to be self-interest, because this is a person with whom you are emotionally entangled, who is you see as a projection of you. And one of the things, and as Shira said, there is a fraughtness about it, because close relationships that are that close are fraught. And I believe it was Amy who was talking a little bit about the power dynamics between that can exist, and that exist between Ruth and Naomi. I've spent, as you said, a lot of time thinking about mentorship, and thinking about the difference of being a mentor, and of being a parent, and of being a role model also. And my perspective, as I see myself in the work that I do, as very, very explicitly feminist work, and explicitly as feminist Jewish work. And I've come to understand very strongly that what I see as very important in a relationship, in a mentor-mentee relationship, is that rather than that the relationship be based on power between, an older, more experienced woman who is mentoring a younger, less experienced girl or woman, it's not about using that power differential. Rather, it's about empowering the younger person to step into their own power. And rather than, in this case, Naomi said to Ruth, "This is what you should do." And I find that the most powerful form of mentorship is asking the young person, "What do you think that you should do?" Young people, and I base so much of my work on this, young people have an enormous amount of self-knowledge that we as older people tend to dismiss. They they're seen as, well, they're young, and their frontal cortexes aren't fully developed, and they need guidance. And it's absolutely true, they need guidance, and they need support. But they know, just as we adults, they know who they are, and they might need some scaffolding to understand what they need and how to actuate how to get there. But if you ask them, "What do you need?" If you ask them, "How can I help you to get there?" rather than giving them directives, they can learn to find the answers for themselves. And I will also say, I noted my perspective is not only feminist, but it's also Jewish. And I find this to be an incredibly Jewish way to approach working with young people, rather than giving them answers, right? We ask them questions, and we ask them to find their own answers deep within themselves. And that's where really I fall with the way that I approach mentorship, that this is a conversation. This is a two-way street. I think that intergenerational relationships really go two ways. I learn from the young people in my life, both those with whom I work and those who I parent, every single day. And that's because not only their own self-knowledge, and not only looking at the world with fresh eyes, but I don't understand how TikTok works, right? And to be a fully formed person in the world today, you have to understand how TikTok works. You have to understand the power of social media as a tool for activism and advocacy. And I also want to address what someone, I couldn't see what someone on the call was talking about, that Naomi, Ruth gave herself over entirely to trusting Naomi. And I thought that that was very, very beautiful. And I also see that as the place where abuse can happen in a mentor-mentee relationship, that you say that you are being asked to trust your mentor entirely and do whatever they say, even if it sounds wild. And again, to give the young person the tools to trust themselves, and again, to step into their very, very fullest power, and to very, very briefly, I'm cognizant of the time, to talk about the way that I've been asked by young people to give them a lot of support in navigating October 7th. And they're being told in so many circles, you need to do this, you need to do that. If you don't believe X, then you're out. And if you, and you know, and the approach that I take, and of course I have my own opinion on what is happening in the Middle East right now, but that's not what they're coming to me for. They're coming to me to unpack the self-knowledge that they have, to build trust in their own instinct, and to step into their own power. And so I ask them questions. And the first question is, how is it that I can help you?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. One of the things that I find so amazing about what happens right after where Susie took us, where Ruth is in the greenhouse, is that when she reveals herself to Boaz, the first thing he says to her is, "Who are you?" Right? He starts off with a question, right? And that changes the whole story. All of a sudden, she's given a little bit of agency to think about, okay, who am I? What do I want? And then when she goes back to Naomi, Naomi says to her, "Who are you, my daughter?" Right? Where she's able to grow because people are asking her the questions rather than telling her who she is. So thank you so much. Ravani Dahlia Davis is here on one of these little. Oh, here she is.
Hi, I'm here. So thank you. Okay. Thank you everybody so much for all of the teaching and the learning and the ideas in the chat. You've really been doing what I'm just about to suggest that we do next, which is really think about the personal pieces that are coming out of all the Torah that we've learned tonight. And at SVIVAH, we're really trying to think about how her Torah and her spirit, what we're doing intellectually and what we're doing emotionally combine, and how the lessons that our beautiful teachers have taught us become very personal and really influence how we make decisions in our life and how we move forward day to day. So we are going to have this opportunity after we officially close to be with Naomi Oxman for anyone who would like to stay and ask questions and reflect upon how tonight has made you feel or has made you think, or just to really see what's percolating for you. You've already gotten to hear from Naomi, so you know that we didn't only decide to have Naomi be here because she has the perfect name, but we also decided to have her be here to support everybody because she is the best listener and the most empathetic person. So she's going to be wonderful and take anybody through who'd like to stay. Also, something else to think about is we are saving the date for Monday, July 1st. Please write it down and save this date. We are really thinking a lot about just kind of how hard things have been and how much everyone is holding in their hearts. And we want to have a time to be together. So our program is going to be called Holding and Healing Together. And we're going to have space to make all of the emotions that we're feeling be present, be welcomed, and we're going to have healing modalities. I'm going to kind of be a little bit vague now, but the details will come out soon. And we're going to be able to explore these healing modalities together and be on a path towards resilience and rejuvenation together. So please save the date. I look forward to seeing you there. And Ravanita, Lisa, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you. I'll pass it back to Ariella.
I love being passed around. That's so fun. This was amazing. And like so Megillat Root is one of my favorites. Just I don't know why. We all get to pick our favorites. But I love that like tonight was two things. One, like Susie said, totally different lens and different perspective that I hadn't thought of. Also, I am so really appreciating, Aliza, this is like a little bit of a new mix up for us. And I am so loving how many different voices and opinions came in from so many different perspectives, mostly because I think I'm grateful to have had so many different mentor-mentee relationships and role models in my life where none of those relationships and interactions have been the same. And so many of these different perspectives are like, maybe I'm old, maybe I'm tired, but like it's feeling like pop rocks and fireworks in my brain, trying to kind of take the little ideas and lenses that each of you have brought in the chat and in teaching to place as an overlay in thinking about my different relationships and how they've impacted me, how I've shown up in them. So thank you for this beautiful Torah in every which way. And Aliza, you're going to kill me for doing this, but I cannot walk into Shavuot without referencing the Torah that brought me closest in relationship to you, where I had the privilege of hearing Aliza talk about the image of Matan Torah that she has. I feel weird like saying your Torah, which is like not okay, but like, okay. But it is one that never left my head. And so I want all of you to have it too. The idea that if all of us showed up at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, that all of us heard the Torah that was unique to our ears. Aliza, forgive me if I'm totally making this up. And the Torah that only we could hear. And our job, if we ever want to have a fuller understanding or come close to a full understanding, is to go out into the world and learn the unique Torah that each one of us heard in our ears. So our job is to open our ears to the wisdom and Torah that each one of us holds. And tonight so embodied that for me. I am so grateful. So I'm hoping that all of you walk into Shavuot remembering how everyone has Torah to offer, and most importantly, how you have Torah to offer. So thank you for being generous with it and showing up with it tonight. Thank you so much for all of that. I'm going to open up the breakout room so that anybody who wants to kind of process with Naomi is able to do so. You can select the breakout room on the bottom if that's a space that you want to be in, but I